It's coffee time with Professor Terrence Coffee.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of this Coffee Time with Professor Coffee, where we talk power, politics, and the criminal justice system. As you guys know, that today is our 2 series. We just had Mrs. Angelica Negroni Kears, the young lady who lost her husband, Andrew Kears, that led to the Andrew Kears Act here in New York State, and that is now being introduced in Washington at the federal level. But back to here in New York State, today we have my man, Mr. Avion Gordon, who is over from the Katal Center for Equity, Health, and Justice. We're going to be talking a bit today on the Less is More Act, the importance of that legislation, and how this legislation impacts the lives and families and communities of over 35,000 New Yorkers. Mr. Gordon, how are we doing today, my man?
I'm doing fine. Pleasure to be on the show.
Well, it's good to have you here. We're very grateful that you and your team took we just want to say thank you so much for the work that you guys are doing over at the Katal Center on behalf of those individuals with justice involvement. And we're just going to get into a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the Less is More Act, what the role is of the Katal Center, and what's happening on that end.
Okay, sure, yeah. Katal Center, our mission is we are a community organization that works to strengthen the people, policies, and institutions to advance equity, health, and justice for everyone. That's our mission. We have 3 interrelated goals, which is ending mass criminalization, mass incarceration, and the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. Along with advancing evidence-based solutions to promote health and safety while building the leadership and organizing capacity of neighborhood residents. So that's our mission.
Okay. Well, we're going to get in. Thank you so much. I've been speaking with Kenyatta there, and we've been back and forth on a lot of issues, and I've been speaking quite frequently on this topic because I think it's a few weeks before it goes to the floor. Correct?
Yes, we have 2 weeks.
So about 2 weeks now. How is how is that being handled on the ground by communities and getting these individuals out to vote, or to get those individuals to call their legislators and representatives up there in Albany?
So we've been using a online action tool, which is what we use to get people to support by calling their legislators. Mm-hmm. And having them co-sponsor the bill or elevate it to leadership. Call Hasties or Andrea Cousins, I believe. So that's what we've been doing on the ground. We've been having weekly days of actions, right? So we have days of actions where we will call out the legislator and kind of like call them back to back and let them know that, hey, you have people who are interested in this bill.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I've been attending a few of those with you guys. My schedule it's been crazy, but it's just been so rewarding to see the work that you guys are doing on behalf of those individuals here in New York with justice involvement. We're going to get more into that, but before we go any further, I want to take this time out to give a shout out to our sponsors and supporters of this broadcast, Thoughts Magazine and Nigel Howard. Hello, we want to thank you so much for tuning in, Nigel, and thank you for your support. La Madrina Entertainment, New York City Beauty, as well as Hood Vegan and Educate, Don't Incarcerate. We want to thank you guys so much for your support. And also, I forgot to mention, and he may be listening now, we also want to give a shout out to one of our newest supporter, Mr. Shaquan Williams. for his support of this broadcast and the work that we do. Again, if you want to get involved and you want to donate to the work that we're doing on this broadcast, we are a grassroots organization that rely solely on your generous support. You can send that donation to FetLife.com. You can go on our website there and you can hit that donate button. Whatever you can spare, whatever you could do. We all know it's tight times. But we really, really appreciate your support, and we really appreciate you tuning in each week with us here on It's Coffee Time with Professor Coffee. This week we have our friend over from the Katal Center, Mr. Avion Gordon, who's going to be hanging out with us this hour. We're gonna chop it up a little bit on the Less is More Act, well, a whole lot on the Less is More Act, and on a few other issues that are taking place throughout our community. As you guys know, that this week is the anniversary of the Tulsa massacre. We had President Joe Biden making comments yesterday on up there in Washington in regards to it. And he, from my understanding, Avian, he's one of the first sitting presidents to acknowledge the massacre of 1921. Have you been following that one?
I have not. We have been working on other things. I haven't had the chance to actually been up in the news recently, so I'm sorry I can't comment on that.
Well, that's not a problem. Yeah, it was one of the greatest massacres in American history of African Americans. And you know, something he said yesterday on air that was just it's just a reality. He said these are the things that aren't taught in our school books, and I know that a lot of the work I believe that you guys are doing there is to empower and educate our communities here. So when we have incidents like this that occur in our society, we really try to acknowledge and take a moment to reflect on those. And also, as you guys know, May 25th, I'm sorry, was the anniversary of George Floyd, who was killed at the hands of police in Minneapolis. I was just on our earlier segment with Miss Kears, the wife of Andrew Kears, who was also killed in police custody. She has founded the Andrew Kears Foundation, which goes to work towards supporting those survivors of incidents such as this. But again, right now, we're here on It's Coffee Time, and we got our friend, Mr. Avion Gordon from the Katal Center. And as I said, this segment is truly going to be dedicated to the Less is More Act. We're going to be going over a few things. I'm looking at a few notes that we got here in regards to some of the stuff we're going to be taking on today. And with that said, and I don't want to try to give too much on this, Avian, but the work that you guys, how many New Yorkers are being impacted by our criminal justice system, particularly under community supervision here in New York? And what does that look like in real time for you and your group?
So there are about $35,000 under active parole, or like you said, community supervision in the state of New York. And at the moment, right, any of these individuals can have their lives disrupted because of a minor infraction on parole. So things like missing an appointment with your PO, or being late for a curfew, or testing positive for alcohol or any substance could actually lead to a violation. But even more specific, right? On top of this, there are 5,000 people incarcerated in jails and prisons across New York for technical parole violations. I think that's what we sit here to fight for. You know, less is more.
And I think that, you know, I was on a conference, and I think that's where I first met Kenyatta, where one of the senators, oh my God, he's a state senator who's supporting this guy. I can't recall his name right now.
Benjamin? Was it Benjamin?
Not Benjamin. It was not Brian. Brian is a different. Brian would kill me if I forgot it. It was the other brother from Queens. He's out of Queens.
Okay.
He was on. Yeah. And one of the things that he gave was the numbers. What is the financial cost to New Yorkers, Gordon, on reincarceration? Let our audience hear the numbers. I usually say it, and I know that people think they think I'm I can go off sometime on.
I think
what's those numbers?
I think you're talking about Anderson. I think he said he gave some whopping numbers. But if we look at New York as a whole, right?
Mm-hmm.
New York State and local governments collectively spend over $680 million to incarcerate people on parole just for technical parole violations.
Nearly $700 million are spent in New York to reincarcerate a person for a technical violation, which is no new offense. No new offense, correct?
Exactly. These are not new criminal offenses. These are parole violations, missing curfew, missing an appointment with your officer. These are not new criminal offenses. Exactly.
And let me share with you one of the things in the validity of what you're saying. And I teach forensic justice and problem solving course at New York University, and also had a long career at Doe Fund. And one of the parts of the programs that we had a lot of men who were released from our correctional institutions who were probation and parole. And some of the stories we would hear, that I would hear, Mr. Avion, we had a guy who had a job, got some overtime, and he had to let the job go because by the time he would get off and get back to, for his check-in, it went in with his uniform, Avion, his uniform from work. Everything is accounted for as his time. And they shared with him that if he came late again, they would lock him up. They then told him, we suggest you get another job. How does this work?
So that's a fact, and I've been impacted by it as well. I've known someone I'm formerly incarcerated, so I've known someone in prison who, because of his work-related job as a sheetrocker, had a sheetrock or a drywall knife on his person and was violated because he wasn't able to, or there wasn't a hearing to determine if that knife was provided by his job. So we see the problems that arise when people have these jobs, that they're missing their curfew because they're late, because they're on public transportation, or because something happened, they had a flat tire, and you can be violated because of those reasons. It's sad. It's heart-wrenching.
It's heart-wrenching, and the fact that it impacts over 35,000 New Yorkers is another challenge. And I do know that under this legislation, what are some of the proposal within the legislation that we're talking about, so our audience will know that this is, these measures have been well thought out and supported by organizations such as the Katal Center. So what's some of the policies and topics in that?
So we have four main provisions of the bill. The first one is restricting the use of incarceration for technical violations. Mm-hmm. There is no method for dealing with technical parole violations other than incarcerating. Mm-hmm. Right? That's like their go-to. The second provision is bolstering due process. No more getting thrown in jail and waiting for a hearing. Instead, what this does is this would give a person a ticket for an appearance ticket to appear in front of the court. The third is providing for a speedy hearing. Right now, currently, a person that's incarcerated on a technical parole violation has to wait months until a hearing is set.
Mm-hmm. That's so when we sit. Go ahead. Yeah, because this one we just sit you sitting in the jail cell, and it's the month after month, and your next hearing comes around, and your next hearing comes around, and your next hearing comes around, which is really counterproductive, particularly when we're talking about a man or a woman who may have a job, a man or woman who is now missing work, a man or woman who is now not able to pay their rent or take care of their children, a person who may be involved in programs, educational programs, and the list of issues goes on.
Exactly. And in the case of my friend who, who was incarcerated, he waited months for that hearing only to find out that, yeah, that knife was work related. And oops, somebody made a mistake. So he wasted months, lost his job, lost his housing because of the mistake that the parole officer made. And it's sad, but let me continue to the last provision, which is providing time, earned time credits. What this does is a credit for every person on community supervision without violating. So those are the 4 provisions. I just wanted to finish that up for you.
Okay, and thank you so much. I do know that we have a lot of organizations such as I do know Tina Luongo over at Legal Aid. They're pushing some things, and there are a lot of people signed on to this legislation to ensure its passage. And I think I mentioned earlier, Brian Benjamin has been one of the strongest advocates and voices in regards to the Less is More Act and ensuring that this legislation gets passed. Is there a collective body of organizations that have joined in this with the Katal Center, or what does that collaborative front look like with organizations?
So we do have a coalition with Unchained and a Little Piece of Light. So those are our coalitions, yes.
Okay, great. And I know Donna Hilton over there. She has done some tremendous work. And also, I remember last year I was at at one of the rallies where we had DA Eric Gonzalez out of the Bronx, and Dr. Clark, I think, Cy Vance, and a few other people that were there. Also, my son, in general, is a great supporter of this work in ensuring that this legislation passes this round. Do you feel confident? And I asked someone else this earlier, so I'm asking, how confident do you feel that this legislation will pass? And do you feel it's a sensible approach to deal with probation and parole reform here in New York State?
Yeah, I do feel it's going to pass. I mean, this similar piece of legislation has been introduced in other states, Arizona, and they're doing amazing. And I do believe it's going to pass. I believe we have support. I'm confident that we will pass this bill this year.
And another question, I think that for those individuals, those who are in opposition, when we think about justice reform, or when we talk about probation and parole reform, do you think that the fear-mongering language that surrounds those individuals with justice involvement plays a role into what the opposition or the pushback that we're seeing from the GOP, those Republicans up there in Albany? How much does that fear-mongering language play into what you're seeing on the ground?
Well, they fearmonger because historically fear-mongering works, right? But that's why we're making such a push. We're driving to educate the public to say, hey, you don't have to worry. These aren't new criminal offenses. People aren't going out. We're not supporting people committing new offenses. These are people who are missing curfew. These are people who tested positive for alcohol. These are people who missed an appointment with their parole officer. So, yeah, on every side, the opposite side, the opposition will use anything they can, any tool in their belt to discredit you or to make it seem as if to fearmonger, so to speak. But the best you can do, and that's why we're giving these speeches, we're giving these interviews, we're going out in public, we're making these phone calls, and we're letting people know, hey, this is what we do, this is what we support, and we're gonna do that.
And I'm so glad that your organization has taken on that, particularly that cause, because a lot of this is what we saw under the past administration with Donald Trump, with the fear-mongering language related to immigrants as well as those with justice involvement. And it's historically, as you just shared, it's a tactic that has always been used where no one really gets to see the details of legislation and who we're representing and what we're representing. And I think it's very important, critically important, that when we have these conversations that you just shared, that our public knows we're not talking about nobody who's going out killing and murdering and none of that. We're talking about people who are on probation with no new offenses or being sent back to prison and costing New Yorkers nearly $700 million a year to reincarcerate.
Exactly.
This is Professor Coffee. You're listening to It's Coffee Time with Professor Coffee with my guest today, Mr. Avion Gordon from the Katal Center of Equity, Health, and Justice. Stay right there and we'll be right back.
Did you ever think incarcerated men and women, or even those recent releasers, ever needed hope, inspiration, resources, mind stimulation? Everything is against them to bridge the gap. Here's why Thoughts Magazine is so unique. It's a resource guide, connecting people with criminal background history, with intentionally screened businesses, programs, agencies, educational institutions, and firms who are intentional about uplifting, engaging, and educating, giving them an opportunity to a stable and secure future. I hope that you are more part of the solution than the problem. Here you can reach Thoughts Magazine at www.thoughtsmagazine.com. Again, that's www.thoughts-magazine.com. This message is approved by It's Coffee Time.
Welcome back. This is Professor Coffee, and you're listening to It's Coffee Time with Professor Coffee Talk Radio. And today in our studio, we have Mr. Avion Gordon from the Katal Center of Equity, Health, and Justice, sharing with us on the work that's being done in relations to the Less is More Act, which focuses on probation and parole reform right here in New York State. Avion, thank you for cutting out time with us today, man. I know it's been a busy season for you guys over there at Katal. This legislation, as you shared with the audience, is headed to the floor in 2 weeks. You say you're feeling very confident. I guess the question I want is, what's the temperature in Albany with legislators surrounding this piece of this legislation?
So we have support. We have a lot of support. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head right now, and I'm not that sheet. I'm sorry, but we do have support. I believe we have gained 29 co-sponsors in the Senate and 66 co-sponsors in the Assembly, from what I remember. So I believe that number is accurate. We have garnished amazing support, and in addition, 8 district attorneys have supported this bill. So this is on all sides. We're attacking at all fronts.
Wow, this is, I want to share with you, I'm also a formerly incarcerated citizen, and I've spent a great number, many years recycling through the doors of our criminal justice system while on probation and parole. A lot of it really had to do, as you shared, with technical violations, which we're going to tap into just a little bit later. But I think that right now, one of the things that our listening audience really wants to know is that, do you think that there has been our system has been used in a draconian way? Do you think that we focus more on locking up, criminalizing, as opposed to introducing restorative justice, aspects of restorative justice? Because in my mind, this sounds like a restorative justice approach that focuses on rehabilitation. And also, I think that the second question, I know I'd be throwing a lot of questions at you. So many things have been happening and questions surrounding this legislation that our most listeners do not know. And it's so great to have you here to kind of clear the air. Do you think that this legislation represents what we call a sensible approach.
I do. I do because like the numbers we said, right? 5,000 people are incarcerated for technical parole violations right now. So there are 5,000 people. And if we attack this, or we find a way to prevent incarceration as being used as a tool, then we kind of make people feel as if they can have a life, they can have a job. A little mistake is not gonna mess their life up. So I believe it is sensible. It is a great approach. It is an approach where we give people some type of benefit for not violating, right? The 30 for 30. Every 30 days you're not you haven't violated, you get 30 off the back end of your sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So we give people some sort of
Incentive,
exactly, to do the right thing. And I believe this is a sensible approach.
Yeah, and I think that one of the other aspects of this legislation is and correct me if I'm wrong, when we think about funding, because a lot of organizations that work directly with justice-involved citizens are those or policies such as the Katal Center. I don't think I guess in my own mind, I don't see the need for additional tax funding for this. I think that how do you feel when you think about reallocating funds towards organizations that are working with these populations to best serve them in their needs and what they want for their lives as they transition through on probation and parole? How does that work?
Well, you got to think about all the money that will be saved just from not being incarcerated. Remember what we said, $700 million. So,
mm-hmm.
So these funds need to go back in the community, and we spoke about this yesterday. We had a great conversation about it, where these funds could really help the community. Like we talked about different communities needing different things. I know where I am in Suffolk County, it's we need more substance abuse programs,
mm-hmm.
but people in Brooklyn and Queens said we need more recreational activities, and people in upstate said we need more housing. So I believe we need to reallocate these funds for the communities that the population would benefit, and every community is community specific.
Exactly. I was looking at, and I know this is actually a template that I find very interesting. I was looking at a program out in California Equity Program, and what they're doing on the legalization of marijuana is they're breaking the state of California up. And what they did is an assessment of each area to see what is needed for those individuals, particularly once their record's going to be expunged, who are, in those directly hit communities. And I think that what you just said brought that back to my mind, where we can do an assessment of each area from Brooklyn to Bronx, Queens, also upstate, and find out what needs that these communities or agencies need and allocate that funding to those places to ensure that the resources are there for these organizations and those individuals with justice involvement. Is that the plan?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what it is.
Great. And because it's been one of the things that I've really been looking at, and, particularly when we look at New York State. And I know that the Katal Center has been a leading voice, not only on the ground, by having, individuals such as yourself coming on to share with our listening audience, but also in regards to policy reform. And again, introducing more sensible approach to justice reform here in New York State, which is really reflective of what's happening around the country. And I think that's my next question. It kind of leads to segue right into that for me. What's the plan? Are there any national plans that the Katal Center sees that's needed outside of what's happening? Is there a national agenda?
National agenda. So right now, I'm at a local level. All right. I know other states have implemented similar reforms, and I know that New York State is the worst state when it comes to incarcerating people for technical parole violations. I believe that at a national level, I believe like we are like last.
Yeah, we are. I can tell you that we are. We are.
You know, so the other states have definitely have a leg up on us. But as far as something, I don't know, I guess closing Rikers, you know, I mean, I know it's not national, but I feel like we have a lot to do in our own backyard first. We can catch up to others. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. The mom always said, you clean up your own backyard first, then we can look at somebody else's job, because I think that in the vein of that conversation, what we do know is that what's happening here in New York, even at the worst case, is that really reflective of what happens across the country, as opposed to what we're seeing in various parts of the United States, where we see the overpopulation, particularly of those individuals who are on community release or under supervision release. So I think that as you shared, there are a lot of other states that have replicated, that have a model that is workable. Do you think that New York can learn from those models in expanding some of the work that's being done here in regards to the less is more legislation, or has that already been done where you guys looked at other templates from across the country and kind of engaged, or was this more organic based upon what we're seeing here in New York?
So yeah, I believe that there's more to learn. There's more. Arizona, South Carolina, they're able to actually have the other states. The other states are doing such great things that we need to follow their model. I believe in South Carolina, there's actually a review board, like an independent review board when it comes to technical parole violations, things like that. We don't even have in this bill, but we do. We should have it, you know. So there's more work that needs to be done. Like I said, I'm like a foot soldier. I'm a guy. I give my testimonies. I let people know how it is. I let people know about technical parole violations. You know, I've just started to get my feet wet. You know, learning the legislative process and how bills are introduced and all that stuff. So I'm still learning.
Well, I want to first say, and I'm sure this has already been said to you, but I also want to say to you now, brother, welcome home, and thank you for being on the front lines in this work over at the Katal Center. And I guess this is, again, I give a test. You know, I'm one of those individuals that I always like to share those organizations that open the doors of inclusiveness to those of us with justice involvement, that they're not just talking the talk, but they walk the walk by providing opportunities to those of us who with justice involvement coming home. And your role there as a community advisor, what role do you play at the Katal Center?
So I'm a Katal member, and I give my testimonies. I speak on the 4 provisions. I speak on criminal justice reform, parole reform. I use my voice to garner change, and that's my role.
Well, that's what we need. I was speaking with a legislator a few months back, and one of the things that she shared with me that, I mean, I've always been vocal in my opinions, and I, you know, even testifying, and this was in 2016 on the Fair Chance Act here in New York State. But one of the things that she shares is that they need more voices of those of us with justice involvement, because we bring to life what most politicians just see as a piece of paper or letters, as if they're not lives attached to that. I have a good friend, Glenn Martin, and I keep his coffee cup here with me on all my segments, that says people closest to the problem are also those closest to the solutions but the furthest from the power and resources. And again, I like to say too, the Katal Center is very impressive for me as an educator, as a graduate of New York University, as all these wonderful things, and also as a formerly incarcerated citizen, to know that we have organizations that are open the door of inclusivity for those of us with justice involvement to share our experiences in advocating for legislation that makes sense and that effectuates change in the lives of those individuals with justice involvement. We're coming up on the 4:30 hour. We got my good friend Avion Gordon from the Katal Center of Equity, Health, and Justice joining us here today. Stay where you're at, and we'll be right back.
How do we bridge the communication gap between those with criminal background and you? One word: thoughts. Thoughts Magazine is a resource guide, building self-esteem, providing opportunity, and educating motivated individuals recently released from incarceration, determined to build a sustainable future. www.thoughts-magazine.com. When we strengthen our boys and men, we stabilize our girls and women. I'm Nija Howard, and this message is approved by It's Coffee Time.
Welcome back, and you are listening to It's Coffee Time with Professor Coffee, where we talk power, politics, and the criminal justice system. We got our good friend Avion Gordon from the Katal Center joining us here today. Avion, you hanging in there with us, right?
I'm hanging with you. I'm here, brother.
Thank you so much. Avion and I were just discussing the Less is More Act and how that legislation will be going to the floor in about 2 weeks here in New York State. This legislation focuses on probation and parole reform that impacts over 35,000 New Yorkers, costing this state close to $700 million per year. The Katal Center has been at the forefront of ensuring that this legislation is being pushed forward there in Albany, as well as advocacy on the ground, as well as providing an insight to the realities of what probation and parole reform will mean for New York, as well as the lives of those individuals with justice involvement who may find themselves on probation or parole here in New York State. So Avion has been giving us a slew of information, and I was going to jump forward with in the news for this week, but I think we'll hold off on that. And I think I'll hold off on our jackass of the week, although y'all know Marjorie Green, that state representative, she has now been asked to leave her post and her position on the committee she represented. She's made some very anti-Semitic statements in the past 2 weeks, and last week she won with hands down. Les, can you give us our round off again for Marjorie Green, Taylor Green, please? I love her. I just love that sound when I hear that, when I say her name. Yes, Marjorie Green, thank you so much for being a jackass. We really appreciate that. Thank you, Les. Also, this week, I want to share on another note, President Joe Biden met with 3 of the survivors of the Tulsa massacre. And as you know, I think it was Ms. Viola who shared on the Congress floor on the tragedies of that day. She was 7 years old, and as you guys may have seen in the news, and you've seen the footage of the atrocities as one of the greatest massacres in American history on Black, on African Americans. Although we got to go back to the slave ships and slavery, but that's another conversation. We'll deal with the massacre of 1921, which is at the forefront, which is, America has a long history of criminalizing and demonizing and dehumanizing African American communities. Black Wall Street was known as one of the greatest times in Black history, where we saw Black wealth and prosperity and our ability to navigate the economic systems of here in the United States. And as you know, what led to that was a young man was accused of touching or a white woman, and it led to this this atrocity that burnt a whole community down that was thriving, and took the lives of over 300 African Americans in one of the greatest single acts of terrorism of American people on this soil, outside of, slavery and a few other things, y'all. So I won't get into that right now. So we just definitely wanted to make note of that. And again, we send our acknowledgments. And I, if I say it on one end, I have to say it on another. Y'all know I'm a big critic of President Joe Biden and the 94 crime bill, but I do want to say in the news this week, he became the first sitting president to acknowledge the 1921 massacre in Tulsa, what we now know as we know as Black Wall Street, as a sitting president. It was fitting to hear him share his views as a president of these United States in regards to this issue. Am I still, y'all know I'm still on my thing with the 94 crime bill, but that's for later. But right now, I do want to take that time to acknowledge the Biden-Harris administration for their role in sharing the truth of the atrocities that took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, nearly 100 years ago. And as you guys know, this week, last week was the week for that, if I'm not mistaken, was the anniversary of the death of George Floyd, which sparked national and worldwide backlash. And his death was a representation of the ongoing oppression that African Americans face, not only at the hands of law enforcement. So let's not just stop there. I think people forget about the economic oppression and the political suppression and all the other suppressions that take place. And I have to make note here, Avion, that we've seen that I think we're up to about 15 states that have introduced new voting laws to restrict those individuals from voting. I think there's in Georgia the law that says that if you give a person water, Avion, if I'm standing on the voting line and you give me water in Georgia, we going to jail, bro. So be careful. So we want to really encourage our listeners and our communities to get out and vote, to voice your opinions, to get involved with organizations such as Katal Center that are working on the front lines of creating change within our communities. And I'm looking at our, I was trying to find the thing. Okay, yeah, we got it. We did that. So we're here again with Avion Gordon from the Katal Center of Equity, Health, and Justice, sharing with us on the legislation that's headed to the floor. That's going to be in 2 weeks, right, Avion?
So actually the session ends June 10th, so we have less than 2 weeks. Actually, the session ends in 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I wanted to say, Professor, is that for too long, right, our community has been disenfranchised. You mentioned the voting laws, and it's just a shame how the powers that be use every tool, every weapon in their tool bag to use against us. Getting water, it's a shame. And I just wanted to add some things that we talked about earlier.
Please.
So South Carolina, I got some numbers here. South Carolina adopted, sanctions for using incarceration as a tool, and revocation and parole violations decreased 46%. Another thing, Louisiana implemented caps on jail and prison terms, and for the first time, technical violations declined by 22%. And trying to read these numbers here, Missouri adopted earned time credit, similar to what we're suggesting in New York.
Mm-hmm.
People on parole and probation terms dropped by 14 months. So the supervised population fell by 18%. So I just wanted to get those numbers out there because I couldn't get it before, and I just got it, and I didn't want to, leave you.
Yeah, because I think that's something that that was sitting on the tip of my tongue, and I'm glad you brought it forth. That it's when we start seeing, when we implement legislation such as this, and you just asked the question, how does it impact recidivism? And you just shared what we have found is that when individuals are giving opportunity, when individuals are giving that space to grow, to live, to seek education, to work, that the recidivism rate drops. Correct?
Yes, sir.
So,
in some cases, by almost 50%, 46%, 20%, 22%. People are. It's crazy how once these tools aren't used against us, that people aren't being violated. It's seen that people are doing the right thing. People are holding their jobs. So that's what we want to achieve in New York.
And I think that's going to lead to, I was speaking with Lucy Lane. She's running for district attorney. And one of my questions, I was at a rally with Shawana Bond, who's introducing the post-prison traumatic disorder. That's also being introduced by Brian Benjamin. One of the things I want to ask you, how much does culture within the probation and parole offices across New York State and across the country, but since we're going to focus on New York, how much does culture, the us versus them, do you think influences a person's outcome when meeting with a probation officer? Do you think that us versus them mentality still plagues our justice system, particularly in the area of probation and parole reform?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's been ingrained in them ever since, the first day of peace officer corps training, whatever training accomplished. They do have an us versus them mentality. And we see it all the time. You know where you see it the most? You see it the most in prison. You see it on the corrections office.
Mm-hmm.
You see when I went through not downstate. I went through one of those counties on my incarceration bid, and we did a cadets. We had a cadets, and at first you would see these individuals, and they would smile at you, and but before the end of their training, and by the end of their training, these people were yelling at you, they're screaming at you, they can't look at you, they're calling you names. It definitely is us versus them mentality, and it doesn't benefit us, the people on community supervision, at all. So we need these laws. We need these laws to make the changes, because if people were to do it by themselves, they have no compassion towards us.
And I think one of the other things that I'm thinking about, how do we begin to change that culture? Do you think that there needs to hiring practices and bringing individuals in with justice involvement? Is it bringing in social workers to humanize that system? Is the Katal Center anywhere in that aspect of how do we begin to address the culture outside of when they say the trainings? Because as you and I know, you know what the trainings look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what the trainings look like. So what's your position, or do you have a position on what that should look like as far as trainings for correctional officers into addressing the culture of incarceration that takes place?
So that's a question I don't know. It's so deep. There's so many different levels. At first, we need to abolish qualified immunity for these people. That's first and foremost. So nothing's going to get done unless they feel there is consequences, right? There's repercussions for their actions. So we can go on for days to hear my side, but first and foremost, we need to get rid of qualified immunity for these individuals, these officers. They need to be held accountable. Because right now, as we speak, no matter what training, no matter what compassion training or bias training, they have to feel that there are consequences behind their actions. And right now, they are not being held accountable. Not at all. We may have felt we got a win with Derek Chauvin, but honestly, it's just one drop in a whole bucket, and the culture continues. That us versus them mentality goes on today.
It continues. I was listening to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from the Bronx, and something she said that just stood out to me. She said we should not, under any circumstances, see the Derek Chauvin's guilty verdict as police reform, and that police reform is a broad thing when we think about correctional officers, when we think about law enforcement agencies, when we think about a lot of things that we see playing out in our communities with policing and how that impacts our communities, because most people know where I'm from. We know that from the district attorney's office to probation and parole and law enforcement, all those seems like they're one offices in cahoots with one another. So it's the lack of trust within those agencies on behalf of our communities, particularly those with justice involvement. I believe that, as you shared, one of the things that we're going to have to do outside of the compassionate trainings and et cetera, which listen, I'm not a big proponent. Let me honestly and openly say that to you, because if I have to train you how to see a human being as a human,
exactly,
that's a whole nother bag of worms that has nothing to do with a training, because no matter how much training you have, at the core, if you look through your lenses and what you see is 3/5 of a man, or you just see an inmate, or you just see a convict, or you just see another one of them, then I think that, we're kind of spinning our wheels and wasting money in those type trainings. But one thing I do, like you said, I do greatly enjoy that you said is the accountability clause, that officers and correctional officers and all that's a part of that system know that their actions they're accountable for their actions in the maltreatment or of another human being, even though that person may be incarcerated or wherever that may look like. This is Professor Coffee. You're listening to It's Coffee Time with Professor Coffee. I got my good friend over from the Katal Center, Avion Gordon. We're about to wrap this thing up, but sit right there, come back, and we're going to finish it up. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back.
Did you ever think incarcerated men and women, or even those recent releasers, ever needed hope, inspiration, resources, mind stimulation? Everything is against them to bridge the gap. Here's why Thoughts Magazine is so unique. It's a resource guide, connecting people with criminal background history with intentionally screened businesses, programs, agencies, educational institutions, and firms who are intentional about uplifting, engaging, and educating, giving them an opportunity to a stable and secure future. I hope that you are more part of the solution than the problem. Here you can reach Thoughts Magazine at www.thoughtsmagazine.com. Again, that's www.thoughts-magazine.com. This message is approved by It's Coffee Time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to It's Coffee Time with Professor Coffee, where we're talking about the Less is More Act that will be headed to the floor in less than a week. We have our guest on from the Katal Center, Avion Gordon, who's a formerly incarcerated citizen and advocate on behalf of justice reform here in New York State. Avion, again, thank you so much for joining us here today on It's Coffee Time.
Thank you for having me.
And we're coming to the close, so there are a lot of things that I got. Some people who were asking me questions, and one of the questions is, how soon will the impact, if this legislation is passed, how soon will we individuals begin to see this legislation taking effect within the criminal justice system?
So within the first 6 months, we will see a astronomical amount of people off parole, myself included. I will be off parole if this bill gets passed, because remember that 30 for 30-day credit, you get 30 off your back end. I believe 12,000 incarcerated individuals would immediately be off.
So it will be retroactive.
Yes, it is retroactive.
Okay, that is great. That was another question. Another person asked, would it be retroactive? So that's good to hear. And let's take this personal. Let's make this personal. For you, what does this mean, Avion? What does this legislation mean for you as a person who's formerly incarcerated, who's currently doing all the tremendous work that you're doing, who's on probation, who's on parole? What does this legislation mean to you?
This legislation on a personal level means the beginning of the rest of my life. Professor Coffee, I have been framed by police detectives in the criminal justice system here in Suffolk County. I have been brutalized in prison. It's hard to talk without getting emotional. Mm-hmm. Because I want to fight this criminal justice system at a level that has never been fought before. Currently, I have a Section 1983 civil rights violation lawsuit against the county because the district attorney's office withheld a video that proved I was innocent the whole time. So this bill passing will give me an opportunity to be off parole, and I could leave this beautiful state that I love so much, but I am not going to continue fighting a federal civil action lawsuit while I'm in their clutches. That would not be smart. So if this bill gets passed, I will be able to move forward with the rest of my life.
Wow. And I'm listening to what you just said, and I'm really taking that in when we feel like that as a people, we still have a shackle or this ball and chain on our feet called probation and parole that restricts our ability to participate in society, to participate in the functions of society, to participate in our own lives, and not feeling restrictive as a human being. Do you feel that your debt has been paid?
Do I feel? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I do feel that I have been paid.
Absolutely. And I think that's a testament to the work that you're doing now with the Katal Center. I think it's a testament when we think about the concept of rehabilitation, the idea of second chances, and those individuals who reflect the best of who we are is so pronounced in this conversation with you today. And I've worked with, in looking at my own life, I've had the opportunity to work with numerous formerly incarcerated citizens, and it's been a privilege to meet such men. And I say that with all sincerity to you as I hear you share not only your pain, your frustration, but also your passion, your commitment to create change by using your life as an example as to what the possibilities could mean for over 35,000 New Yorkers and 5,000 of those who are currently incarcerated.
It's coffee time with Professor Terrence Coffee.